American people the truth about what our options are in ending this war.
Check this out.
Tomorrow, the order goes out from I'm President of the United States. I issue an order. End the war today. Begin to withdraw all American troops. It will take a year to get the American troops out. Do you hear me now? That's the truth. It will take a year to get them physically out. Now, if you leave all the equipment behind, you might be able to do it in 7 months. And you leave those billions of dollars of weapons behind, I promise they're going to be used against your grandchild and mine someday.
Hey fam, back with another video, back with another reaction. Hope everyone out there had a good weekend. We got a banger today, y'all. We got a good reaction. We got some longer clips in today's video, so I hope you guys are okay with that. But before we get into the reaction, please leave me some comments down below, some topics you guys want me to get into. I would love to get your guys' feedback and put them in my reactions. So if you guys can do that, I'd really appreciate it. But hey, enough of the chit chat. Let's get into the reaction. Oh yeah, and stay tuned for the end of the video. I'm going to give you guys some details on when I'm going to be going live again. All right, here we go. Everyone's favorite man. That's how we're starting off the show. Sit back and enjoy the reaction, y'all. Don't get too creeped out.
The Navy has a ship that never has to come back for gas because it just takes the water from the ocean, extracts the hydrogen atoms, and pushes it into a chamber for engine combustion, and they run on hydrogen. They don't run on gas anymore. Matter of fact, that's the wave of the new future. Rolls-Royce developed the airplane engine that runs on hydrogen, and all the cars, including all the EVs, are going to go in the garbage can. All cars are going to be hydrogen-based in the next 10 years. Mark my word. Astrophysicists communicate and send information out into space to connect with ET or talk to ET on the hydrogen frequency, the most abundant frequency in the universe. Now, when you look at the Great Pyramid, it's got these giant shafts on the sides that align with Orion, Aldebaran, Arcturus, and all these other star systems on specific time frames. What's happening is on specific alignments, they were transmitting on the hydrogen frequency. And this is now my own hypothesis, updates to those star systems, because why have those shafts pointed at star systems? Why have them have the capability of shooting hydrogen through those shafts? To me, it's a communications device, the same way we're using right now today in modern astrophysics.
What about, you ever meet one of those guys who's like,
All I got to say is you better find the company, the startup company like Tesla, right? Imagine if you found Tesla 20 years ago when he was barely making it and his stock was 10 cents a stock, even cheaper, 10 cents on the penny, right? Do some research, y'all. You might find a hydrogen company, invest $100, 10, 20 years from now, that stock's worth millions. That's how you do it.
you know, when 9/11 happened, they're like, I'm going over there.
Yeah.
Thank
Pat
God
Tillman.
for guys like that.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh,
take care of it for
I'm going to
us.
stay here.
Pat Tillman.
Pat Tillman.
He left being a fucking NFL star to go over there.
Insane.
And he got killed by friendly fire.
Friendly fire.
Oh, you hate to
And
hear
they had
it.
to hide it.
They had to hide it.
Oh,
yeah.
no, he was a hero.
He was
Well,
that
not that he
annoying?
wasn't a hero, obviously.
He was just
He's
a
still a hero.
bummer of a
place.
guy? Like a
No,
bad hang?
I think it was an
No,
accident.
no.
It was an
Oh,
accident.
it was an accident. I thought they were like,
Some
this
people said it was on
guy's
purpose.
broke.
Some people say it was on purpose.
Like
That's what I
because he
heard.
started to see like, oh, this is fucking pointless. What are we doing here even? And then like, oh, we got to shut him up. Keep him a hero.
Oh, no.
Is a theory. I don't
Boy,
know.
I hope not.
Yeah.
God, you hope not.
What's a conspiracy theory that you 1,000%
Oh, we getting into it.
believe in?
The United States military murdered Patrick Tillman in order to stop him from speaking out against Bush and the Iraq War. If you're a fan of the NFL or watched the news at any point in the early 2000s, then you probably recognize Patrick Tillman. He was a former NFL player who gave up a lucrative multi-million-dollar NFL contract in order to serve his country and enlist in the Army in the wake of 9/11. Tragically, he died in the line of duty, and the official story was that he was killed in an enemy ambush. For his bravery, he was awarded a Silver Star, the Purple Heart, and given a nationally televised memorial service. However, further investigation
About my motivational clip at the end. Y'all wanted to do a nice Pat Tillman motivational clip.
proved that not only was this
One of them
story
days.
true, but that the Army intentionally lied about the circumstances surrounding Tillman's death, both to the American public and to the Tillman family. You see, Tillman was actually killed by friendly fire, and not just the stray bullet collateral damage type of friendly fire. No, he was shot 3 times in the head from an M16 rifle which was fired from just 10 yards away. Now, you might be wondering right now how a trained soldier could possibly accidentally shoot his own comrade in the head 3 times at such a close range. And you might also wonder why his fellow soldiers decided to burn his clothes and personal journal in direct defiance of protocol. But these are soldiers in a chaotic war zone after all. I mean, crazy stuff like this happens all the time in these situations. That alone is not evidence of homicide. After all, why would the Army want to kill their nationally beloved poster boy? Well, as it turns out, Tillman was not going to stay their poster boy for very much longer. Contrary to popular belief, Tillman was actually a liberal who opposed Bush and the invasion of Iraq. You see, he enlisted to serve his country by finding Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, not to hunt for non-existent WMDs in Iraq, a war which Tillman described to friends as, and I quote, so fucking illegal. And to cap it all off, at the time of his death, Tillman was scheduled to meet with Noam Chomsky, one of the most vocal critics of the Iraq War. Of course, this meeting never happened because he was killed by his fellow soldiers. So what do you think? Did Pat Tillman just happen to be shot in the head 3 times on accident by his fellow comrades at close range right before he was about to go public with his criticisms of the war? Or did the U.S. Army intentionally have him murdered in order to avoid a PR nightmare?
The world almost ending in 2000, better known as Y2K. People really thought it was the end of the world.
Does anybody remember this? I was 10 years old, 9 years old, actually. So, I don't really remember. But anyone that was older that was actually knew what was going on, were you guys freaked out? Were you guys stocking up on stuff? I think a lot of people were. I really do. Let me know down below if you were one of them.
And it would all be caused by a computer bug. But the bug was very real. They just spent a lot of time and money fixing it. But if they didn't, who would have known what would happen? Pretty much here's what this bug did. All computers, electronic devices, they all were set for the 1900s. Instead of lapping over to 2000, they'd reset to 1900. They weren't programmed properly. And this was global. So banks, hospitals, schools, airports, everything like that. Their computer systems would just corrupt. Everything would shut down. We would lose power. We would go back to the dark ages. It was so huge that even companies were jumping on board with it. The Y2K bug was real. Everyone thought nuclear power plants were going to melt and explode. Airplanes would fall from the sky. Everything electrical would just give up. Which is pretty crazy when you think about it. We definitely didn't know as much about technology then as we do now. A lot of people started preparing, stocking up on food, building shelters, all kinds of things. I've heard some pretty wild stories. So tell me, what did your family do to prepare for Y2K? Honestly, mine didn't do anything. But I want to hear some good stories on what people have done.
The world ended in 2012. Remember in the year 2020, when people believed that we were actually in the year 2012 because of the switch from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar in 1752, and that the belief that the world was going to end in 2012 or 2020 could actually be true. What if they were right? I don't know about you, but time has been passing by faster than ever, and everyone has been so negative. And let's not forget the biggest event of 2020. You know, the global pandemic that led to the death of millions, the close down of businesses, economic crisis, and the stay-at-home orders. What if the world as we know it did end? We just didn't notice. Theories suggest that we are currently living in a different reality, and while some believe that the world actually ended in our perceived 2012, and others believe it ended in the Julian calendar 2012, both agree that there has been some sort of paradigm shift that has altered reality as we know it. And we all should know by now that there are hidden messages in our films and TV shows. So what if the film 2012 was trying to tell us something? But what do you think? Have you noticed anything strange lately?
Life in Hollywood, Whitney Houston. This one gon' hit, cause she ain't deserve what happened to her. I don't know how you're a multi-platinum selling artist and you die broke. Oh wait, yes I do. Devils like this. The Clyde Davises of the music industry. Suck you dry, take your soul, and leave you hanging out to dry. I'ma let my man over here say it best.
The problem with ungrateful actresses. Although acting often seems like it's just about the glitz and glamour, in many ways it's a thankless job, with celebrities being as blindly loved as they are hated. In the case of actresses, the latter tends to be more common. It seems as though every single year an invisible memo goes out into the world that crowns a new actress as difficult, resulting in her reputation plummeting, the public turning on her, and her career suffering as a result. We've seen it happen so many times at this point that you could even say there's a pattern, with multiple actresses being hit with the 3 uns: ungrateful, unprofessional, and unlikable. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the actresses who've been labeled this way by the public and the press in recent years. We'll explore how these labels have affected their careers, the double standards at play within the entertainment industry, and why, in most cases, the backlash they received was undeserved. Let's get into it. Janet Hubert, who originated the role of Vivian Banks on the popular 90s sitcom The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, developed a reputation for being difficult following a public feud with the show's male lead, Will Smith, a dispute that eventually led to her part on the show being recast. According to Hubert, she and her co-star got along just fine when the show first began in 1990, but as time passed, tensions started to rise. While filming the 3rd season of the show in 1992, Hubert was not only pregnant, but was also in an abusive relationship, and these understandably stressful factors resulted in her being less chipper on set. But, as any woman knows, regardless of what's happening at home, the rest of the world expects us to grin and bear it. Although Hubert maintains that she acted professionally in spite of these hardships, in interviews Will Smith claimed the opposite. Quote, "She really has a lot of problems that she brought to work with her. After the first season, she never could really digest the fact that she wasn't the star of the show, on many occasions giving me the middle finger and storming off the set. She was a really difficult person." Hubert was still prepared to sign on for the following season of Fresh Prince, but was shocked to find during negotiations that NBC intended to cut her salary and screen time by half, something she alleged was a, quote, "slap on the wrist for being pregnant and in hormonal hell." While early reports claimed that she'd been fired, Hubert has stated that she actually made the decision to leave the production herself, although let's be honest, they'd left her no other choice. After Hubert's departure, Smith continued to talk about their strained relationship to the press, saying in an interview in 1993, quote, "I can say straight up that Janet Hubert wanted the show to be the Aunt Viv of Bel-Air show. She's mad now, but she's been mad all along. She said once, 'I've been in the business for 10 years and this snotty-nosed punk comes along and gets a show. No matter what to her, I'm just the Antichrist.'" In December 1993, Hubert filed a lawsuit against Will Smith and NBC seeking unspecified damages for defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The suit also suggested that besides influencing the production to reduce her salary, Smith had also hurt her marketability by spreading negative rumors about her to the press. Hubert unfortunately wound up losing the lawsuit, and her career came to a standstill as a result. In comparison, Will Smith was thriving, starring in massively successful films like Bad Boys, Independence Day, and Men in Black, which helped make him a 90s superstar. With that sort of pull in Hollywood, Hubert didn't stand a chance, and she struggled to find any work that was more than a one-off bit part. For the Fresh Prince's 30th anniversary in 2020, Hubert and Smith reunited for the first time in decades, finally addressing their quarrel in person. Hubert shed some light on what her life was like following her departure from the show. Quote, "I had this new baby, and no one. Family disowned me, Hollywood disowned me. My family said, 'You've ruined our name.' Words can kill. I lost everything, reputation, everything. I understand you were able to move forward, but you know those words, calling a black woman difficult in Hollywood is the kiss of death. It's hard enough being a dark-skinned black woman in this business." I'm sure someone in the comments will say, now what does that have to do with anything? But it's important to acknowledge that Hollywood has a history of discriminating against and excluding women of color, with rules even being instituted in the past that limited their opportunities in the industry. Although the 1990s saw a notable increase in films and TV shows that featured black actresses, the vast majority did have lighter skin, which put Hubert at a disadvantage as someone who didn't fit into that beauty standard. This, combined with Will Smith's public disapproval, essentially ensured that the rest of Hollywood would refuse to work with her. Now 67 years old, Hubert has finally shaken off her difficult reputation, but she can never get back all of the work she lost because of it. And it's crazy to think about how differently things might have played out if her co-stars, the producers, and the media had had just a bit more sympathy for what was going on in her life at the time. One of the most public examples of an actress being shunned and shamed for her seemingly ungrateful behavior is Katherine Heigl. Beginning her acting career when she was just a teenager, Heigl appeared in a handful of films including 1996's Wish Upon a Star and 1998's Bride of Chucky, before being cast in the 1999 TV series Roswell, with the role garnering her a bit of attention from the press, although many of the comments were directed towards her looks. As the years went on, she starred in a handful of lackluster television films before finally getting her big break in 2005 after being cast in the ABC drama Grey's Anatomy. Although expectations for the series were fairly low, as other medical dramas like Saved, City of Angels, and Strong Medicine had failed to become commercial hits, Grey's Anatomy unexpectedly struck a chord with audiences, catapulting its relatively unknown cast to fame. Heigl garnered critical acclaim for her performance as Izzy Stevens, even being nominated for a Golden Globe in 2006 and 2007, and she was considered one of the show's breakout stars. She followed this up with a lead role in the 2007 raunchy rom-com Knocked Up, which was a surprising critical and commercial success, and was credited for turning Heigl into Hollywood's next it girl, even being compared to the likes of Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, and Meg Ryan. Later that year, she also won her first Emmy for her role as Izzy Stevens, beating out two of her fellow Grey's co-stars Sandra Oh and Chandra Wilson for the award. With all these back-to-back achievements, it seemed as though the foundation was being laid for a successful career in Hollywood, but in January 2008, that all changed. In a now infamous interview with Vanity Fair, Heigl was asked about the projects that had helped make her a household name, and when discussing Knocked Up, she called it, quote, a little sexist. It paints the women as shrews, as humorless and uptight, and it paints the men as lovable, goofy, fun-loving guys. It exaggerated the characters, and I had a hard time with it. On some days, I'm playing such a bitch. Why is she being such a killjoy? Why is this how you're portraying women? 98% of the time, it was an amazing experience, but it was hard for me to love the movie. Although I would hardly consider this a harsh critique, Heigl's comments received pushback not only from the public and the press, but also the other people who worked on the project. Writer-director Judd Apatow and co-star Seth Rogen would both talk about Heigl's criticisms in the years that followed, with Rogen saying that he felt betrayed by her, while Apatow expressed that he was shocked that he hadn't received some sort of apology. Both would also poke fun at Heigl's subsequent career choices and her personality. Leslie Mann, who also starred in the film and is married to Apatow, even felt the need to defend her husband. Quote, I kind of don't know what she was talking about. I'm an actress reading scripts and I've seen what's out there and it's slim pickings. Judd writes great female parts. It seemed like all anyone could talk about in relation to Katherine Heigl in early 2008 was how much she hated Knocked Up, to the point that she felt pressured to clarify her original comments in an interview with People magazine. Quote, although I stand behind my opinion, I'm disheartened that it has become the focus of my experience with the movie. The truth is, it was the best filming experience of my career. Every person that was a part of making Knocked Up helped to encourage, support, and inspire me. I never intended for anyone to think otherwise. Because Knocked Up was her most recognizable role at the time, many members of the public felt as though she was biting the hand that fed her, especially since apart from making her an A-list star, the success of the film also gave Heigl significantly more bargaining power, allegedly being paid $6 million for 27 dresses in 2008 compared to the $300,000 she received for Knocked Up. Heigl also fought to renegotiate her salary on Grey's Anatomy, something which was reported on negatively. She was described as having complained about not being paid as much as the show's lead actress, Ellen Pompeo, and the two women were frequently pitted against one another in the press. After it was reported that Heigl was going to be pulling out of the show entirely, ABC themselves confirmed that she would be continuing on as Izzy Stevens with a pay raise, saying, quote, in recognition of her tremendous talent and value to the show, we offered to raise her compensation significantly. This squabble led to public opinion.
Disney's upcoming Snow White movie is looking like the biggest dumpster fire to come out of the company so far. Rachel Zegler, the actress playing Snow White, is actually proud of her hatred for the character in the story, calling the prince of the story a stalker, saying that she thought it was too scary and that she's maybe seen it twice across her entire life.
Her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird.
Her However, this wasn't just a one-off. Nearly every decision Disney's made towards this movie has announced the same type of stupidity. For example, instead of 7 dwarfs, Snow White is going to meet 7 diverse magical creatures. The prince will be cut altogether, and the story won't revolve around love at all. Instead, Snow White's going to pursue her dreams of becoming a leader, a gold boss, and seizing power for herself. So how did it come to this? Snow White is an essential part of Disney. It was the movie that started it all. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that this film was the backbone of hundreds of millions of childhoods. The money from the movie literally built Disney's first studio. So how were Disney going to treat the most sacred and beloved work of art? Well, let's take a look. So one of the most famous love stories, up there with Romeo and Juliet in its cultural significance, is going to be about girl boss attitudes instead. I mean, it's an insult to even call this movie Snow White. The movie seems like a parody of modern Disney, but it's genuinely just the standard for them now, as for years, they've been pumping out flop after flop, sequels and remakes that all tell the same story by hijacking people's childhood classics. A few of the more recent ones are The Little Mermaid, Peter Pan, Wendy, Pinocchio, Mulan, Aladdin, The Lion King, the list just goes on, and there's a bunch of similarities between all of these movies. They all got middling to poor reviews, and they all barely broke even or just flat out lost money. Even the critics couldn't justify them, and audiences definitely weren't interested in these movies. But more importantly though, they were all completely unnecessary, and there's a few good reasons for all of these failures, and a huge reason as to why Snow White is going to fail at the box office. And the most obvious one is that nobody wanted these movies to begin with. The originals are classics, made with love and care for the fairy tales or stories they're telling. Over decades and decades of history, they all rose to the top and kept their place in culture because of this. So trying to remake them immediately puts you in competition with some of the best movies ever made, which is ridiculous when you take a look at what the remakes bring to the table. They're just bad films, plain and simple. They have some good qualities of course, and it's hard to generalize. The visual effects are often stunning, and the actors try their best with what they're given. But with few exceptions, all these films have absolutely awful writing. The way they treat their characters is almost childlike in its simplicity. The heroines of these movies aren't flawed or interesting at all. Instead, it's the world that gets forced to change around them. Mulan's a perfect example of this. In the original, Mulan is no different from anyone else from the outside. She struggles at first, but overcomes her obstacles through hard work, perseverance, and the strength of her will. In the remake though, Mulan is given superpowers instead. Only they're not really superpowers, instead they're explained through a bastardization of the Chinese idea of qi. The end result is a character that doesn't change or grow because she's already finished her arc before she's even started. And a final irony of the Mulan film is that while it sold itself under the buzzword of diversity, it was one of the most exploitative films in modern history. I mean, most of the filming took place in the Chinese province of Xinjiang, the same province where China is imprisoning and torturing millions of its minority peoples in re-education camps. With the movie even giving credits and thanks to the local Chinese government, including the specific department responsible for these re-education camps, or in more plain words, concentration camps. Mulan's a result of the standard heroine template that Disney uses in all of their modern movies. Without flaws or growth, these characters are just boring and unlikable. Instead, they've been designed to fit a set of traits and qualities which the corporations have decided are what makes a strong female character, a girl boss, and they're always the most powerful character in the story, to the point where the conflict loses all of its momentum. Watching Captain Marvel feels like an episode of One Punch Man, without any of the good bits, just waiting for her to finally and effortlessly win. They'll also magically gain whatever ability they need to continue the plot, like in the newer Star Wars movies when Rey gets her new healing powers or her sudden mastery of lightsaber fights. They never earn this power, but once they get it, they immediately know what to do and how to use it. At the end of the movie, they haven't learned anything about themselves actually related to their struggles and their journey. Instead, it's the world that changes and realizes their superiority. Like She-Hulk, who's almost immediately in full control of her powers. She effortlessly integrates into her identity. It took Bruce Banner a movie, a multi-film character arc, and a whole cinematic universe to get to that stage. But a final part of the strong female character template is that they're always obsessed with their own power and leadership. Of course, it's great to teach little girls that they can rule the world, but now that's seemingly the only thing women can be anymore if they want to be feminist and acceptable by modern standards. In effect, we've traded one closed-off box to put female characters in for another one. Women don't have to only be housewives and princesses, but they don't have to be leaders either. Feminism means the freedom for women to be whatever they choose to be, framing the desire for love, having children, and a happy family as a patriarchal indoctrination has the same silencing and dehumanizing effect as any other constraint society puts on women. But that's exactly what Snow White will be about. And if Rachel Zegler's interviews on the film are to be believed, Snow White won't be falling for a prince or even thinking about love or other people at all.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Instead, she reduced the prince's role in the story to being a stalker. Inevitably, his only role in the remake will be as a laughable example of a pathetic weak man who Snow White pushes aside to pursue what's really important. Or he's just cut out entirely, never even mentioned, and never in the film to begin with. I mean, in the original, he's an essential part of the story. The movie's arcs around this, but Disney's already shown their own disregard for the source material. It isn't surprising that Zegler's barely seen the film, but it begs the question, if she hates the fairy tale and the original so much, why is she even starring in Snow White in the first place? Well, of course we all know the real reason for this. It's the same reason Disney's making the film in the first place. By pandering to this caricature of feminism, they're hoping they can cover up the bad writing and the many flaws in the premise itself, that the politically correct masses will gobble it up and use it as an example of what modern women should aspire to be. But all the virtue signaling in the world can't cover up the fact that barely anyone even wants this. The movie is written and directed by a man. The audience is a mix of men and women. And at the end of the day, Disney has nothing to do with feminism at all. And you see, the thing is, Disney's audience don't want this corporate brand of half-baked pseudo-feminism that Disney's trying to sell down everyone's throats. I mean, when you compare Disney's many failed attempts at this compared to the Barbie movie, it becomes crystal clear at what people really want to see. The movie's just setting itself up to be just one more in a long line of overly sanitized Disney flops. And defenders of Disney's approach might put the onus on the audience, calling out critics of their films for being anti-inclusive or simply not respecting stories told from the female perspective. However, Barbie's success is evidence that this notion is simply not true at all. It's blown away every recent live-action Disney project out of the water, and is currently on track to become one of the highest grossing films of all time, showing us that films that are inclusive aren't always complete flops, but woke, virtue signaling, boring, empty movies are hated universally in the public. And yet for years, Disney has continuously pumped out these sorts of movies, producing flop after flop, sequels and remakes that all tell the same story, hijacking everyone's childhood classics. Barbie has smashed countless box office records, and has already grossed over $1 billion worldwide, making it clear that the world does have some capacity to respond well to some female-driven narratives when the script is written well, and its creators have respect for the source material while at the same time not taking themselves too seriously. Because you see, Disney isn't just failing because the movies are about women, it's because they're terribly written, virtue-signaling films given the same constant gold boss narrative that's as stale as it can come. Whereas Barbie is the perfect example of a blockbuster feminist story that can be universally related to. It's enjoyed because its message and main character, despite being in Barbie land, are very much somehow grounded in reality. Margot Robbie's Barbie isn't an exceptional leader or an especially gifted or talented individual. She's one of many Barbies in her little world, with most of these other Barbies being more tangibly impressive, having more specialized skills than Margot Robbie does. And when she's met with unexpected conflict, she's just as ill prepared as many a person would be. The odds seem instantly stacked against her, and she quickly becomes a fish out of the water. And the uphill nature of Barbie's struggle and her changing throughout the movie as a result of what she's experiencing is what makes it a compelling story. And despite her flawless appearance at the start of the movie, we quickly find out that she's just as flawed and vulnerable as everyone else is. And yet Disney's female-driven blockbusters seem averse to writing their protagonists this way, out of fear that they will be criticized as anti-feminist. However, it's clear that when you take a look at male-driven movies, just how flawed this logic truly is. Not every male protagonist is John McClane, James Bond, or Sherlock Holmes. Sometimes the most compelling protagonists aren't these great men we dream to be. Sometimes they're the characters who are regular, seemingly unspecial people, who when faced with conflict become great, going through a hero's journey. So not every female character needs to be a beacon of unwavering ruthlessness or bravery to be interesting or feminist. They just have to be someone a woman watching can see themselves in. And the other key element to Barbie's success is its creativity. The movie is uniquely designed, the cinematography draws you in, the set designs and creativity is engaging for all audiences. And the movie, while being far from perfect with a very questionable narrative, is still entertaining to almost everyone. There's a reason it grossed over $1 billion at the box office, because the Barbie movie took some needed risks. The jokes are surprising, the existential themes are at the forefront of the movie, and the filmmakers are unafraid to make a viewer uncomfortable at times. However, when you take a look at Disney's recent movies, they're so unwilling to take any risks. so scared to accidentally offend any particular group that the movies end up saying nothing, and in turn, they appeal to no one. The stories are just completely sanitized and full of virtue signaling. Women don't identify with them, and men of course never want to see these movies. And perhaps the strangest part is that the box office numbers reflect all of this, with nearly all of their live action remakes raking in just a fraction of what they could have, considering the A-list cast and the popularity of the IPs. So when will Disney finally learn from this? Not this time apparently. A lot of the outrage around Snow White has been about their choices surrounding the 7 dwarfs. It's really just a lose-lose scenario, and yet another reason they shouldn't even make this film in the first place. You see, in the original story, they're a collection of name stereotypes, while also being dwarves on top of that. They laid the groundwork for decades of stupid jokes and prejudice, so it's inevitable that they'd be changed in some way, but Disney's original plan seems to have been to keep them pretty much the same. An earlier remake called Snow White and the Huntsman kept them as dwarves, but didn't actually hire any dwarf actors and just superimposed other actors' faces onto smaller bodies. However, Disney were quick to change their tune when Peter Dinklage made a statement rightfully calling them out as backwards, as it's ridiculous to preach diversity because you've hired a Latino actor for the main part, and yet you keep the disabled stereotypes in the film. So they did a 180, turning the dwarfs into nondescript magical creatures, only one of which is actually a dwarf now, which obviously isn't a good decision either. Cutting out the dwarfs may avoid the stereotype accusations, but it's all so far removed from the actual fairy tale that it's barely even Snow White anymore. With no prince, only one dwarf and a power-hungry Snow White, unconcerned with any true love, hating men and the patriarchy, it's a wonder why they're sticking with the name and not just making an entirely new film. The decision also means that Disney will be hiring way less dwarf actors, who already have trouble finding work that isn't demeaning. This all comes at the same time as Hugh Grant playing the role of an Oompa Loompa in another Charlie and the Chocolate Factory remake. At the end of the day though, they could have cast real dwarfs in the movie, as long as they actually had good writing. If they humanized the characters rather than using them as pawns in a game of identity politics, it could work. But knowing what we know about the rest of the movie, this will never happen. And we can't forget that this is all a publicity stunt for Disney anyway. They don't care about actually representing minority communities or standing up against prejudice. If they did, they wouldn't censor their own movies when they're trying to sell them to more repressive countries. One scene from Avengers Endgame, where a man just talks about going on a date with another man, was entirely cut from the Russian release. The same thing happened in the Disney Pixar film Onward, when it released in 2020. A same-sex kiss scene was edited out of Marvel's Eternals for some Middle Eastern countries, and China's probably one of the most demanding countries for censorship, and Disney's very happy to play along. A huge amount of their movies would have been even bigger flops if it weren't for the Chinese market. They changed the Tibetan character to our white one for Doctor Strange, all so that they could secure a Chinese release. A Simpsons episode that included a joke about Tiananmen Square mysteriously disappeared from Hong Kong's Disney Plus, because Disney only cares about the money, killing all of their ability to make good movies and inspire creativity. So maybe after the Snow White failure, they'll finally learn, but probably not.
Maybe this is the time to address the final solution to the women question. None of this is news to you, I am sure, my sweet, sexy viewer. But we've now had several years and several successive MCU installments that collectively amount to a pivot toward the vagina-possessed half of the population. And to paraphrase Hans Christian Andersen, where words fail, money speaks. It has been a complete, unmitigated disaster. People have, on occasion, attempted to defend this film on the grounds that the cast were not allowed to promote it. This seems to me to be cope. The cast were fully available to promote Ant-Man 3, and that film was the MCU's biggest bomb until the Marvels came along, of course. But those interviews that have taken place since the strike's end only further disprove the idea that cast interviews might have helped in any significant way, because we've reached the point of infinite self-referential excuse-making when it comes to failing Marvel films. No sooner is the strike lifted than Kamala and Rambo pop up on The View, for example, and the fact I don't need to tell you what the focus of that interview was is proof that such interviews mean little to a general audience. You already know what they're going to be talking about. Women, diversity, natural black hairstyles, etc. ad nauseum. Please don't play the clip from The View. Please don't play The View. Please don't play The View. Oh fuck, it's The View.
The Marvels is
the #1 movie in America and is the latest chapter in the Marvel Universe that's putting female superheroes and superfans in the lead.
Iman, we know how important representation is, and you and your character are both Pakistani Muslims. What does it mean to you to represent your culture on such a huge platform?
I mean, it's honestly, like, for me, representation wasn't even something that I thought I wanted or needed more of.
It's good. Keep going.
So only until I realized how big of a deal it was when I read the Ms. Marvel comics and I was like, oh my God, this comic book is holding a mirror in front of me. It was, I felt seen on a whole other level, like down to my core. And you know, like Marvel Universe, like these movies play all over the world. It only makes sense they represent people from all over the world. They've got like aliens and green people and talking trees. Like, how far-fetched are brown people, you know?
Oh, you made it so far, and then you just...
Tiana, you've said that you made a point to wear your natural hair, which I love that you do that, as much as possible for your roles throughout your career, including in the Marvels. Now, why has that been important for you to do? Because
nobody cares. Nobody cares.
So this is one of the first interviews the cast were able to do to promote the film. But what in that excruciating segment actually counts as promoting the film? If you hadn't already seen it, and if you hadn't already watched this review, what would you now know about the film that you didn't already know? Because I'm struggling to name a single detail, and of those details that were mentioned, how many of them are what you might call customer-facing? How much of the preceding falls under the category why you, audience, should see this film that I am in? The answer is, of course, next to nothing, because the diversity racket isn't about the customer, except insofar as it is about sodding the customer. It is first and foremost about self-aggrandizement. When actors come out and preach the importance of diversity and inclusion, the reference point is almost invariably themselves. I felt it was important that I was seen. It's really great that people like me have a character played by me that they can relate to. I choose to wear my natural hair because I think it's really important to people like me. Actors, as is by now well established, are not normal human beings. The original name for actors in ancient Greece was Hippocrates, which is apt since it is the root of the modern word hypocrite, but it's not quite what I'm getting at. Actors are not normal human beings, actors are highly narcissistic types who believe that they are much more important than they are. Genuine diversity and inclusion on the screen, which is to say a story showing varied peoples in a varied world, is no bad thing at all. The bigger your world, the more it can help. But diversity and inclusion as a movement and a slogan is a fundamentally different proposition, because it has nothing to do with representing reality and everything to do with projection. The actor does not want to uplift others, the actor wants to be uplifted. There are sinister and calculating forces at the level of corporate finance and the broader economy that smiles on DEI narratives, but on the level of the individual, and particularly on the level of the actor, there really isn't a strong ideological or thought-out political position being pushed. Actors wish to represent because it inflates their ego and their sense of their own importance. All brown people can finally see themselves in me, is the subtext of Iman Vellani's comments in that clip from The View, entirely omitting that plenty of brown people enjoyed the MCU in the decade before Iman Vellani was on the scene, and for reasons that have nothing to do with color, and even less to do with a culture that Vellani's character, Ms. Marvel, doesn't even begin to explore. The share of the population that nods and claps when an actor preaches diversity and inclusion of this type is vanishingly small. These are the people who were never fans of the franchise, and never invested in the story. Plenty of them would have seen the earlier Marvel films as the most casual of casual viewers, and not found their experience altered much either way by the composition of the cast, because that was never really the point. The masses who did see the film and who were invested in the MCU were invested in the various films' timeless and universal things, the quality of story and of character, which transcends arbitrary and uninteresting categories of race and of sex. The early films had something to say, had a narrative to weave. They were works of drama, defined by their invitation to forget the real world and inhabit the fictional one for a time. Nobody really cared what Robert Downey Jr. might have to say about veganism or climate change or Donald Trump. No sane person held Wanda Maximoff up as an idol reflecting real-world ideals and aspirations, because that was not the point of those characters or their stories. The suspension of disbelief entails the subjugation of your real-world awareness by art itself. You are not a Republican or a Democrat or a communist or a libertarian sitting in your seat looking for a Marvel character to preach your message at you. You are invested in the film on the screen, in just the same way as anybody sitting next to you, whether they are a Republican, a Democrat, a communist, or a libertarian. We've now had several years in which the studios and their mouthpiece actors have been allowed to experiment with the precise opposite approach, and the results are not surprising. When you sacrifice immersion and drama itself to make political pitches to tiny sections of the population, you have done away with your film's universal appeal and alienated the vast majority of people who see art as the most valuable means of escapism. The MCU had attained a vast audience of all races, colors, and creeds via precisely this universalist storytelling approach, which makes it perhaps the most useful case study anyone could wish for when comparing the results of artistic and propagandistic appeals. They developed one of the largest and most diverse and loyal audiences in cinematic history via the artistic approach, they switched to the propagandistic approach, and they lost their audience. Even those groups who are supposedly the targets of this new propagandistic style are less inclined to see a new Marvel film than they were before being targeted specifically. Millions more women and millions more black people would have watched and enjoyed Iron Man than will ever watch or enjoy the Marvels. Yet nobody sat around in 2008 extolling Iron Man's DEI credentials. The vast majority of the audience knows when they are being patronized and rejects identitarian appeals for loyalty. Give them a story and they will come. Tell them that it's just really great that someone who looks like them is on the screen. Well, they might at best shrug, though I have to say, I think a fairly healthy skepticism is now abroad when it comes to modern Hollywood marketing. Increasing numbers of people have progressed from being merely indifferent to these shallow propagandistic tricks to becoming actively skeptical and even hostile to them.
You've described this as an all-female sci-fi extravaganza.
Extravaganza, you've got it right, Lindsay.
What would you tell people that they can expect?
I would say you can expect a really different flavor of Marvel movie. This is an all-female empowerment story.
Please stop.
And I think it's really rare to see all-female heroes and a female antagonist at the same time.
Well, very good reason for that, Coach.
There's all these different fantastic dynamics that are at play, which I just don't think people have seen before.
Oh my God, she's still going.
You talk about the all-female cast, also a female director, black woman, who's directing, Nia Acosta.
We've made history, yeah.
Shut up, shut up, shut up!
I'm so glad you brought that up, Lindsay, because for me, Nia was kind of the beacon, the reason for me doing the film in every single way. She is the youngest woman. She is the first black woman.
Will you please shut up?
I'd wager that crosses all identitarian divides. I'm pretty much gay. I'd love to see a well-written gay character in a big franchise with a brilliant story who completely fits his universe. But the minute someone tries to tell me that that film is going to be really good because it's representing the big gay, yep, I'm almost certain that film is going to be complete fucking sludge. Because identity and representation don't matter at all unless the thing you're represented in is good. We are probably quite a long way off an explicit appeal of that sort to the big gay anyway, because the fatal conceit amongst those progressive types who pitch identity and inclusion is that most of the groups they claim to speak for really don't like each other. Good luck getting black people to endorse a gay Miles Morales. Good luck getting Muslims to back a gay, a gay anything, frankly. The two demographics large enough for Hollywood to consider safe are women and black people, or what I think we still euphemistically call the urban market. The Marvels attempt particular appeals to both women and the urban market, as indeed does the broader MCU across a number of entries. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier aims to represent the urban market against evil whitey politicians. Sam Wilson is the urban market Captain America, and it's about damn time we got that representation, said maybe 5 or 6 middle-class white people who really liked the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But appeals to women have been more common and for much longer even than appeals to the urban market in the MCU. The term MSHU arose and pisses off all the right people, not because it's a right-wing conspiracy, but because it's quite a catchy term for a very real and transparent push by Hollywood generally and by Disney in particular. On the face of it, you can see why. Women make up half or more of the global population, and yet comic book movies probably do skew towards men. So the theory goes, a shift toward the vaginal side of the force, properly calibrated, produces gains that vastly outstrip any potential losses. Losing even a quarter of your male audience can still make economic sense if you genuinely believe you can exploit the vast untapped potential of women. But a problem inevitably arises. Sacrificing your organic audience in a bid to artificially and deliberately target a new audience will never work. Because by definition, you are not treating your desired audience with the same honesty, care, and respect that won you your organic audience. Men, and I must add quite a lot of women as well, didn't flock to see Iron Man or Captain America or the Avengers because the studio asked them to. None of the MCU's most successful films were supported by ad campaigns extolling the virtues of men, or pledging to represent men, or preaching the importance of male representation. Those films were popular because the characters and the stories were well crafted and they attracted a general audience who wanted to see more. There is an arguable exception